I've been working in IT for longer than most of you have been alive. I started working in 1963. I worked in 5 different countries, in at least 6 different enterprises, private and public. When I was asked to retire because I was too old by the United Nations, that was my last job, that's why I came to Geneva. Before that I was in the UK in the process of privatizing British Rail, which has a phenomenal IT complexity. When the UN told me I was too old, I retired. I was invited by the National Audit of France to work with them to become an IT auditor, which I have done for the last 8 years and I enjoy enormously. It's a great profession, IT audit. And in my spare time, I run workshops for companies. I teach a postgraduate course at the Webster University, Geneva, on business systems management, not on technology, but how to market technology. And I speak at conferences, which gives me free, wonderful holidays all over the world. Again, I recommend it when you retire as a professional. I called it the rise and fall of the CISO because I'm very conscious that throughout my early career, there was no such thing as information security. There was information technology. There were operations and there was systems development, and security was strongly embedded in these. Access controls. They're as old as IT. So as a profession, it didn't exist. Then in the early 1990s, security professionals started to emerge. And I appointed the first information security officer in the whole of the United Nations system. And it was 1994. And most people say, why would you want to have a person doing that? And the reason was that we had to introduce firewalls and encryption and things which were not coordinated. Now, 2005, 2010, the worm has turned into a butterfly. Information security is a hot topic. You have conferences, workshops, seminars, books. It's the center of the universe for the profession. And how will it evolve in 2015? And I'm going to tell you things that you should know. I'm sure you do know. But perhaps not from the perspective that you are expected to used to see. So if you don't agree with me, I'll be only too pleased, because this is a conference paper in evolution. Okay, we know one thing for sure. Information security has made it to the board. But they didn't want it. They don't want it now. They have it because, like Société Générale, somebody misused the IT systems to lose them €6 billion. Barings Bank no longer exists. DuPont lost confidential documents on process and technology worth $140 million because one of their employees downloaded 27,000 documents, nobody noticed, and took to a competitor. So the board is now worried about compliance, big word compliance, fraud, reputational damage as British Petroleum, right? New things like enterprise risk management, and downtime, data leakage, and corrupted data, which is today a massive problem. I'll come back to that. And governance, I think you work in banks, you work in the financial sector, your company probably has quite reasonable information systems and security governance. If you work in the public sector, the chances are they don't know what you're talking about. IT is a mysterious thing, they don't want to know if it works, don't touch it, that sort of thing. And I'm very much involved with ISSSS, Information Systems Audit and Control Association. Look at their website. This is worth joining as an organization. $120 a year, worth every penny. But they don't have a branch in Geneva, which I'm trying to create. And they look at governance, and we're not getting into the detail, but there are two domains in governance that are very important. To protect assets, which is all about risk management. The word security doesn't appear, it's risk management. I'll come back to that as well. And then, monitor performance. Because for every organization, there will be an acceptable level of downtime, data loss, and data corruption. If you have a small restaurant with 5 computers and your most important data your accounts and your client's database. Information security is not a big topic. If you write an electricity generating plant with a nuclear reactor, information security is fundamental. If you are Swiss International Airlines and your reservation system has a downtime more than 1 hour, you have a very big problem. If you have a downtime of 1 day, you risk losing a lot of customers. So companies have appointed this poor person called the Information Security Officer, Chief Information Security Officer, and they expect far too much from this person. You need to, in the first place, have technical expertise. You need to be able to understand encryption technology and firewalls and antivirus and everything else that goes with it, applications design. And you need to be able to explain this in terms of business impact. Now, out of the hundreds of information security officers I have met, I would guess less than 5% speak business language. Say, do you know, Chief Executive, that 1 hour downtime to your company has a cost of 2 million francs? The reputational impact is going to be like this. You're going to be on page 1 of the newspapers. They don't say that. They will say, you know, there is a probability of 0.025% that over the next 12 months we'll have an outage. They don't want to hear that. It doesn't mean anything to them. And then you need to understand things, you know. What if we don't comply with the law? In Switzerland, there's the Datenschutz or whatever. There's plenty of legislation. I'm unfamiliar with Swiss legislation. I know the American legislation. I know the British legislation. Sarbanes-Oxley demands that you should be able to demonstrate how you control privileged access to source data protection, source code and production data. When I go as an auditor into a French ministry and I'm asked to see the database of privileged users, they say that what? Okay. You need to understand what's going on out there. This is too big a job for one person. Too big a job for a small team. But the reality is that in many organizations, especially in the public sector, you are lucky to have one security officer who should be doing all of that. It's not end. Now, I started in the prehistory. I started in the 60s, I'm not in the 50s. But in the old days, security was all about the military and diplomatic communications, about encryption, about not allowing people access. And apart from a very, very small number of mathematical geniuses, most people have no idea how to use a computer. In 1977, the chairman of Digital said, I cannot see why anybody would want to have a computer in their home. Digital is no longer in business. Right? Now, iPads, every one of us has at least one computer here. So, spies, malicious insider, fraudsters, and other attackers did already exist in those days. But they were high specialized, specially trained for the purpose. And we'll come back to that. Just please be patient. Where are we today? An avalanche of change. Things change so fast that you need to be retired in order to have the time to be able to track what's going on. If you have a full-time job, you go to meetings, you have to do the budget, you have to have meetings with your staff, you have to sort out problems, etc., etc., etc. Your day is gone. And then you have legislation. Okay, it doesn't change very fast. How many of you have a copy and read the Council of Europe Convention on Cybercrime? It's the only international legal instrument to do with cybercrime. It's very well written, it's not very long, it's a free download. But if you are a security officer and you don't have a copy and you haven't read it, you're exposed. Invest half an hour. I know you don't have the time to do it, but a key is SOX 404. It's not the end of the story. It's all about controls, proving the adequacy of controls and so on. Is that the job of the security officer? I will come back to that because is change management part of security? In my book it is. Is business continuity part of security? In my book it is. Can one security officer do all of those things? No, they're spread all over the organization. So then you've got no shortage of standards and best practices. It would take you a lifetime to read all of those things. ITIL, Information Technology Infrastructure Libraries, 5 books that big. They're brilliant. They've been around since 1991. Do you have time to read? Do you apply them? Software engineering body of knowledge. How many of you have responsibility in your job for checking source code for applications written in your house? Because if you don't, how do you know somebody's giving you a logical law? Data management body of knowledge. Garbage in, garbage out. So if your data is not of good quality or somebody goes and corrupts your data, you know that last year there was a malicious software floating around the web, that when you logged onto your computer and it was infected, the hard disk can be encrypted. And in order to access your data, you had to pay $150 to somebody in a distant country. Fortunately, it disappeared. Project management body of knowledge. All of those books put together are stacked that high. Wouldn't it be nice to know what's in them? NIST, National Institute for Standards, Science and Technology. Special Publication 800 series. Deals with information security. 123 documents. The shortest of which is 50 pages. But they're good. They're really, really good. British Standard 7799, ISO 27000 series. That you must know, you must have them. But they're 15 years old. ISO 17799, now 27002, is 15 years old. It's never been updated. But it's good. But the ones that follow, 27003, 4, and 5,
and 6,
off the record, I think they're useless. COBIT, Control Objectives for Information Technology, audit tools. They're more than audit tools, they're self-assessment tools. I think COBIT 4 is brilliant. But COBIT 5 is coming out. Another big pile of papers. Information Security Forum Standard of Good Practice. Phenomenal, very useful. COSO, you know, the Committee of Sponsoring Organizations, Risk Management Framework. How many of you could, hand on your heart, raise a hand and say, I read all of them? How many of you have read one of them? Okay, we got to start, right? But you see the challenge of the profession that these things are coming up faster than we can keep up. And then of course we got all the other things which are on the technical side, if you like, encryption, malicious software, perimeter protection. There is no more perimeter. It's a flat world. And identity and access management, which is today's vendor's paradise. There are more vendors offering identity and access management solutions than any of the other things. It's the big thing, with good reason. Okay, this this is history, denial of service attack, overwriting somebody's website with other content and all these sort of things. Largely not a major problem today anymore. It does happen, denial of service attack occur, but not so bad. Attacks on confidentiality. This is where organized crime is working. Blackmail, extortion, industrial espionage, military espionage, all kinds of other things, and all the insider threats. Because that's how you make fraud. You change the data, which is happening, moving into the emerging way. Data integrity. Let's go back to the nuclear electricity generating plant. There's all these wonderful IT systems designed by IBM or the IT internal team and so on, which are fine. You check the code, you validate everything and so on. Then you're outside the building, and there are all these cables all over the place. There is a thing called SCADA, System Control and Data Acquisition. 1980s technology, little printed circuit board, very often homemade, software of dark good quality, undocumented. But that's where you get the data that goes into the computers to do the process control. And if you read fiction, or science fiction book, that's the weak point. I read a book recently, don't ask me for the name, I forgot, where a nation state, China in this case, intercepts and modifies the data in a nuclear power station in Scotland so that all the indicators show green, normal temperatures and normal operation, while in fact the reactor is in a runaway mode. Is it impossible? No. Is it difficult? Yes. Can it be done? I'm sure. But then we start talking about cyber terrorism and cyber war. It's beyond the topic of today. But this is where I think we can all expect to see more serious attacks. Because if you tap the data and you do it slowly, you're on a spreadsheet with a recurring formula, one tiny little error in the spreadsheet, and by the time it's got six rounds of calculation, the results are completely useless. You do that on a large scale, credit card companies, you know, the intergalactic databases that governments have on citizens. The French database for smart cards entitling people to medical insurance has 48 million people. You mix those records and you can have big social impact. Okay, so where do you work today? I hope you will agree with this, because everybody else that I've shown this has agreed. People are the weakest link. People will not listen to policies, they will not read policies, they will do stupid things, they will do things maliciously and deliberately. So that's number one issue. Processes. Well, change management, disaster recovery, business continuity, segregation of duty, account creation, you name the hundreds of processes. Can you all say we can certify these processes to CMM level 4 or 5? I doubt it very much, because when I go in as an auditor, oh, I don't know, you have to ask Charles, can I have a look at the process documentation? 2001. Technology is not perfect, but is the least of your problems. And these are challenges because the CISO, if you're in a technical department reporting to somebody down in computer operations, you have no access to anybody. You can run awareness campaigns, but okay. Funding, I'm sure if you go and ask for more money, more people in your team and so on, they'll say, but of course, no problem at all, how much do you want? It doesn't work like that. Enterprise risk management is a parallel organization looking at organizational risk that very often fails to include information risk. They're more concerned with bombs in the building and with strikes causing breaking windows and so on. Then we haven't corrected data. And of course, you all love the auditors. I get such a warm reception wherever I go as an auditor. There's a pressure on all sides. And that's the life of the CISO today. Is it going to get any easier? I doubt it. Okay, and why not? Because I think, apologies for the red, that's the wrong color. The information securities environment, it's exploding, it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It started with confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now we've got the other three big letters in red in there, governance, risk, and compliance. None of them is technical. And then you have going out. Outsourced IT operations. How can you, as a CISO, vouch for the security arrangements of an outsourcer? Who might be in India or in the Philippines or in the United States or whatever. Secure code. Well, we got this fantastic company in India, and they are doing this application for us. Do you have the means to do a peer review of their code? Because if they don't, you have the risk somebody's going to call you into the staff and say, by the way, you know, if you don't transfer $500,000 to this account by the end of tomorrow, your application is going to die and will never run again. Got to go to cover. It's happened to me in another job. It does happen. We talked about the systems control and data acquisition, business impact analysis, disaster recovery, business continuity planning. How good are your capabilities in that domain? I don't need to know, don't tell. But I think everybody could do better. Risk management. Risk management is, as I'm going to argue as we continue, the new center of the universe. Policies, you all issue policies, right? Password policy, account access policy, downloading of documents, attachments. You must have a host of policies. Does anybody read them? Because I've seen policies. The IT guy, and this is the UN, the IT guy writes a policy. This is appropriate use of information resources. The title itself is obscure. He wrote a recto verso page and said the following things are forbidden. It went to the HR department, formerly known as personnel. And then they made a more sensitive human touch. It didn't say prohibited or forbidden, it said discouraged. And then it was gender neutral and nationality neutral. And instead of recto verso page, it was 4 pages. Then it went to the staff representatives, the trade unions. Oh, you're putting too many restrictions on us, and this is 5 pages. Then it went to the legal office, where it sat for a year. And it came out, and I can send you copies, public domain, 11 pages, written by lawyers. You know, paragraph B, subclause A, C appendix, or whatever it is. And you know something? Nobody read it. And if I go to the UN as an auditor, and I said, I want to see your copy of the security policy. Never had it. They don't track who's got the copy. They don't ask people to sign that they will comply with the policy, etc., etc., etc. And having been issued in November 2004, it's never been updated. So policies. And if you don't monitor for compliance with the policy, you might as well not have it. But you have it to make the auditors happy. However, the reality of this is that not even Superman, being the Chief Information Security Officer, can be expected to do all of those things and all the things that were in the previous list. Right? That means other people have to do things. So in every organization that I come across, there is somebody, hopefully, that does information risk management outside the IT department. It's business risk. Somebody writes security policies, somebody does business continuity, somebody does access control, somebody checks for code, somebody is responsible for compliance. And then you've got all the other stuff that happens in an IT department. But the reality is that in a small organization or a big organization, everybody's too busy doing their own work. So the flow of information between these people is as shown in the picture, 0. Maybe when things really go bad, they'll talk to each other. And then, the challenge is that you've got many players with different responsibilities, different reporting lines, quite unclear accountability boundaries. I've heard people turn in a disaster recovery test for real. I was there in front of me. One goes to the other says, do you have the cartridge? No, I thought you did. End of test. Incompatible priorities. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Oh, I got to go to a meeting. Right? And then what you need to make it work, you have all these people with different functions, mostly in the IT department. Emotional intelligence. I won't talk about IT people, because you're all IT people here. Interpersonal skills. I had one guy working in my organization tell me that the reason that he chose IT as a career was he did not have to talk to other people. Or the other who picked up the phone and the help desk says, oh, it's not you again, what do you want this time? Right? But you met people like that, you know they exist. And politics, and we need to come back to politics as well. Because if you don't play the politics, you're finished. And okay, we don't need to stick to that. You'll have the presentation of this, all the usual consultant stuff. But that's the last thing you want, because in your current job, with all the constraints, difficulties, lack of resources, and so on, you are exposed to being blamed. It's your fault. And after that, the atmosphere at work is not good. you lost respect for your senior management, which you probably already have. Very difficult to rebuild from this situation. So look for another job, not particularly ideal. So, to me, that's the current status of the Chief Information Security Officer. Tied hand and foot with constraints. No decent metrics. If you go to talk to executives, can you tell them in business terms the metrics? It's going to take 3 days to restore service. And each day is going to cost you 16 million Swiss francs. We've lost this data. It's going to appear on page 1 of the papers. Your reputation as a company is going to be manure, etc., etc., etc. You don't have those metrics. I think very few IT people have those metrics today. I think an area for future development. Reporting line. I'll talk to that in a minute. Who do you report to in your function? Because if you report to the Chief Information Security, to the Chief Information Officer, you have no direct line into senior management. The IT people are seen as belonging in the basement. The guy I reported to when I was working in the UN in New York had as his direct reports IT, facilities management, physical security, and the cleaners, office managers. That was the status of IT 12 years ago. It will not change. So when you have that status and you report within the IT function, this is what I want to talk about the future. That's your challenge. The workload is growing, your budgets are shrinking, so you need to become Superman. Okay. This is now where you need to relate whether this applies to you or not. You have the Chief Executive Officer. Chief Executive Officer will have a first line of reporting, CISO, finance, maybe HR, Chief Risk Officer, increasingly certainly in the financial sector. But the IT people, usually, a couple of steps behind, Director of Administration, sort of things, facilities manager, toilet managers, whatever. Down the organization, 2, 3 levels. And then the Chief Information Security Officer is below that again. So how does it work? Do you know the game of Chinese whispers? Right? You go through on this chain. The message that goes to the board is not the message you intended. And therefore, no influence, no visibility, no authority, only responsibility. Is this the job you want to have for the rest of your professional careers? I don't expect anybody to say yes. So, how do you get out of that? Okay, one possibility, which is to become the business, not information, business information risk officer, with a primary function of saying, if this goes wrong, this is the impact of the business. Then you get somebody else to do whatever it needs to be done in technical terms to implement it. But it's not just business risk, it's regulatory risk, legal risk, financial operation, the protection of intellectual property, big stuff, reputational risk. Now, the biggest handicap to IT professionals today is that they are a cost center. And if you're a cost center, you know what's going to happen? They're going to cut your budget. Because we live in a culture where budget cutting is inescapable. Public sector, private sector, it doesn't matter. Budget cutting. So, how do you become a value center? Okay, that's a new role, the one-man band, where somehow the person responsible for information risk needs to put together a team. This is not a job for one person who can do all of those things. Understand information risk. What are the threats? What are the vulnerabilities? What is the impact? And then you identify those impacts that you can put a red sticker on, half a dozen of them. Information risk in business terms. We are going to lose clients, we are going to lose reputation, we are going to lose money, we are going to be unable to operate, etc., etc. Information security policies. The organization as a whole needs to understand what is expected of them in order to contain that risk. The risk will not be zero, but you at least attempt to mitigate it by giving indications to people, the weakest link, remember, or what's expected of. You need to build their awareness. But as somebody said at the recent conference, there is no party for stupidity. And people will do stupid things because they are tired, because they're thinking about something else, because they're in a hurry, because. There is no perfect security around. IT and data governance, you need to communicate with the people that deal with IT governance so that they can understand that by spending money on this particular domain, they reduce the risk. And therefore, it's like when you buy insurance, you buy a 10,000 francs holiday, you spend 60 francs buying an insurance policy to mitigate the risk. The risk's still there, but you at least don't lose all your money. And I think risk management and information security need to be seen more and more in the context of being an investment you make to mitigate the risk, like buying an insurance policy. You need to have meaningful risk indicators. How do you go to people and say, we have an exposure here because our risk indicator is that our staff turnover in the IT security function is 20% a year. Is that a risk? Of course it's a risk. Or you can say, we only got one guy that knows how to do this thing. Is that a risk? Or we are too small to practice segregation of duties. So Charles over there changes source code, tests it, and put it into production. All along. Wonderful. So you need to build this portfolio of key risk indicators. And you need to be able to deliver a business case for investments in security. And the business case needs to be about value added, not about cost. That's the challenge. Okay? Where do you start? If you were to be a chief information risk officer, or you want to start shifting your job in that direction, well, does your company understand their risk appetite? If they say, you know, okay, don't worry about it, it means they don't necessarily understand the risk. You can avoid the risk, right? We are not going to do that, full stop. You can ignore the risk and say, well, forget it, it will never happen. You can accept the risk and say, okay, if it happens, we'll cope with it. You can mitigate the risk. We are going to invest to reduce this risk because of its impact. Or you can transfer the risk. Mr. Outsourcer, we want you to take charge of this. Write us an application. I want to guarantee that it's fully documented, for example. If we make it, but make it, the story is not finished, but there is not much left. So, the last thing we said is, you know, the one-man band, the person who will become the chief information risk officer, not working alone to do all of those things. Where do you start? Where do you start? And I think that the thing which, in fact, anybody could start now, depending, regardless of what job you do, is to define the risk profile of the place in which you work. You know the culture, you understand the culture. To understand the risk appetite is a different thing. And that requires, again, very careful discussion. It means understanding the impact of things going wrong with information systems and networks and technologies. What happens if, the CIA, what happens if we lose the confidentiality of the data? If you're a hospital and one of your patients is a celebrity and the data is leaked to a newspaper, that could be very serious. If you are a financial institution and you do investment or stock exchange trading and you have 1 day, 2 days, 3 days of unavailability, you may be out of business altogether. If your data gets corrupted, you're a credit card company and your data becomes corrupted, you don't know how to bill people, you need to go back to all the records for the last week or month and so on. Then you start building an industry-specific, a company-specific profile of the domains of risk that can have significant impact on the work of the organization. Those are the only ones that matter. To go for a pursuit of perfection, so we are going to address every risk in the book, more work. Because there are hundreds of thousands of things that can go wrong. At the table, I'm going to bore them again with the same story. I had to face an unexpected risk. A computer center in London, a dozen operating staff, backups and tapes and all that sort of stuff. And 2 days before Christmas, they decided to go out and have their Christmas lunch together. So we arranged for a couple of temporary staff. They went, they had lunch, they had a great time, they came back at 3:30, happy, smiling, and so on. The next day, only one turns up at work, salmonella poisoning. Now, would you have thought, because I hadn't, that food poisoning becomes a threat to your computer operations? And then I started to look into it, and I came up with an A to Z list of things, which is just infinitely long. The building next door goes up in flames, and your air ventilation system takes in all the smoke into your computer room. You can't access the room for 24 hours. And all of these sort of things. So there is no way you can deal with all the risks and all the threats. You can deal with the key vulnerabilities if you understand the impact of things going wrong as a result. And if you go to your executive and say, I got 3 items that I want to put right, then listen. If you go and say, I got 122 areas of risk that I want to put right, then forget, they just stop listening at that point. So 5 is the maximum number, 3 is good. I said, Chief Executive, are you aware that we have 3 situations where the threat and the vulnerability, if they come together, would cause this colossal impact? It would cost you a job. You will be interviewed on television, all these sort of things they don't like. And when you speak that kind of language, they will listen. Tell me more about it. How do we fix it? What do we need to do? So it's understanding your risk profile, how much risk the organization can live with. Okay, listen, if that goes wrong, it's too bad, we'll live with it. Or they will say, no way, ooh, that could be devastating, here's the money, go on and fix it. And it's as a result of that that you start formulating the security needs. You don't start from the security needs and say we need to have perfect security, because you never will. Then, having defined that, it's 1 page. It's 1 page. These are the 3 most important things we need to do to reduce impact to the business. And then, this is what we need to do. This is a mini project. This is what we need to spend. This is the time scale we're going to spend. These are the selected vendors. This is going to be the project manager. This is going to be the staff looking after it. And this is how much it's going to cost to do it and then to support it through its life cycle. It's a business case and a little project plan. Is it difficult? If you are dealing with 3 domains of risk that you want to address, it's a human task. If you have 150, don't even start. And then, for your own peace of mind, to communicate with your team, to communicate with other people, are you going to follow or adopt any set of standards and best practices? Remember earlier on we talked about COBIT and PMBOK and SWEBOK and you name it and you name it. Choose one that you feel comfortable with. Doesn't matter which one it is. At least you say, we are following the best practices advocated by this organization that have been established since so and so and so and so. So you're not improvising. You can demonstrate you're following established practices. Are you familiar with the concept of process maturity, CMM? Right? CMM says there are 5 levels, 1 to 5, of how you do things, processes. Level 1 is ad hoc. You don't even recognize the process. Level 2 is repetitive. Peter goes to the data centers and puts the cartridges in a box every night at 2 o'clock in the morning. Right? Level 3, documented. So if you get the temporary staff from an agency, you give them a piece of paper and say, this is what you do. Then you go on to level 4, which is where you monitor, level 5 where you optimize, and so on. Attempting to reach level 5 is mission impossible. Level 3 is a good start. and it takes time to get to level 3. But you need to ensure that your process is good enough to meet the requirements of your company. If you are in Deutsche Bank, level 4 is the norm, right? And then you need to have things that you measure in business terms that make sense, not only to you but to your executives. Key performance indicators and key risk indicators. And key risk indicators, I can spend an hour talking about key risk indicators. You don't have an hour, so you're lucky. But look it up, it's a very interesting domain because they're not measured in numbers. Yeah, they're measured in numbers, but they represent activities that create exposure. I think I have a little bit of that. No, not too bad. Okay. 5 questions to do information security and risk management. Question 1, I should have used bigger letters, apologies. How critical are confidentiality, integrity, availability, and compliance to your specific organization? And each one of those will be different depending on what business you are. If you're in the military, if you're in intelligence, if you are in law enforcement, if you are in finance, if you are in insurance, if you are in every organization will have a different set of answers. Without those answers, you cannot do risk analysis. And if you cannot do risk analysis, you cannot define how much security you need. What would be the consequences of not doing information security and risk management properly? Okay, there will be a different answer for everybody. But if you don't do information security and risk management, the exposures, the impact of things going wrong could put your company out of business and you out of a job. Now comes a real challenge. How do you communicate information security and risk management to the decision makers, which will be the board, the chief executive, the chief finance officer, and so on? They all speak a different language. And they are not going to learn the IT security language. You need to learn to explain that in business terms. Loss of revenue, loss of operational capacity, lack of compliance, 20 years in prison, etc., etc., etc. And then, which is the real human challenge, how do you change the culture of the activities you do so they're not seen as an obstacle, but they're seen as a benefit? So you stop being a cost center. For as long as you are working in a cost center, your future is not good. The day that you're seen as a function to add value to the organization. One of my friends is, in fact, the chief risk officer at the bank in London. And his salary, I'm envious. He's a key player. And then, oversight and reporting. Who do you report to? If you report to the chief information officer, your will is very limited because it affects the whole of the organization. How do you report? To whom do you report? When do you report? What do you report? These are things where, you know, each one of you will come up with a different set of answers. And they're all equally valid. There is no formula answer that I can give you now, and you can apply it as and when you wish. Right. I read a book on power in organizations, and there was one sentence that stuck in my mind. Power is the ability to change the status quo. Can you change the status quo in your organization? You need to have all of those skills. All of those things. Very few will be given to you. Authority may be given to you. All the others are up to you to develop, maintain, grow, work with. Each one is worth discussing. But if you know which ones are your current strengths, look at the others, see how you can improve them. If you feel that that's not part of your portfolio, you may consider looking for a different kind of job. Because without that, security, risk management, and so on are not likely to succeed in your environment. I told you I was exposing a lot of prejudices today. Don't necessarily take this as the gospel truth. Now, this may interest you, and I would encourage you to look it up in Wikipedia or any other source. Howard Schmidt has been appointed by President Obama a few months ago to be the US government cybersecurity coordinator. And you know something? He's not a technical guy, he's not an IT guy, he's a military guy. You look him up in Wikipedia, his knowledge of technology is, I heard him speak at the conference, he is magnetic. He is a terrific communicator. He can explain to Obama, who's a politician, issues of cybersecurity at the national scale, critical information infrastructure. So, maybe you can make more money. I'm sure that my friend working in London for a bank as chief risk officer earns more than that guy. But can you have more influence? Spend 2 minutes, go to Wikipedia or any other source, and look him up. Because he spent all of his life doing things that are not directly related to other security risk. And I put it as a great opportunity. It might not be easy, but it's opportunity. And this is my last slide.